welcome. Screwed that up. Welcome to Your Mac Life for Wednesday, November the 2nd, 2016. I'm your host, Shawn King. This is show number 1113. On tonight's show, as always, we'll talk to our good friend Jim Dalrymple of The Loop at loopinsight.com about last week's Apple event, about the new 13 and 15-inch MacBook Pro. Jim, unfortunately, like all the reviewers, has only gotten his hands on the 13-inch touch barless MacBook Pro, but we'll get his thoughts on that. What are your thoughts on it? Now, I know none of you have actually seen it or touched it or felt it. Have you bought one, though? Are you going to buy one? Is this the MacBook Pro of your dreams? Were you disappointed by last week's event? I'm sure a lot of folks were. We'll talk to Jim about the event and his thoughts and opinions on it. Apple is doing some, for lack of a better term, interesting things. They may not be good interesting, but they're interesting nonetheless. Removing a bunch of stuff, adding stuff, things that not everybody wants removed or wants added. What are your thoughts on that? What do you think about what Apple announced last week, the way they announced it? It is arguably the Apple event that has caused the most ink to be spilled, virtual and otherwise, in discussing what was announced, what wasn't announced, and Apple's new direction, new direction. We mentioned this in the show, or I mentioned this in the show 2 weeks ago, that last Thursday's Apple announcement was going to show us what Apple thought of pros and where Apple was going in the pro market. Do you think that's true? Do you think Apple has given us their indication of what they think of pros and where they're going for pros? It doesn't look rosy. It doesn't look like they're going good places if you're a pro. I think the problem is, too, how do you define pro nowadays? Is pro just the so-called creatives, the Photoshoppers and the painters and the video and audio guys? Or is a pro a road warrior, someone who's in an airport and works on spreadsheets and documents in PowerPoint and Keynote? Is that a pro? And what does Apple think about pros? I think it's going to be argued, and I will argue it, that Apple has shown us pros don't matter to them anymore. At least not as much as before. What do you think? Email me, Shawn at yourmaclifeshow.com. Let me know what you think about Apple's announcements and what they didn't announce on last week's Apple event. In our starting point for photography segment, we're going to talk about rain. Oh, God, rain. In the last 31 days here in the Lower Mainland, here in Vancouver, the general area of Vancouver, it has rained 29 days. Yes, that's right. Do the math. 31 subtract 29 means we've had 2 days in the last month where it didn't rain. Oh, my God. Until you live in that situation, people go, but you don't realize how psychologically draining that is. That, seeing minimal sunshine for days and weeks on end. We got lucky that the rain let up a little bit, enough to let the kids go trick-or-treating on Monday, which I was very happy to see because we had a bunch of kids trick-or-treating, and it was kind of fun to watch them dressed up. And our first kid was a teenage mutant ninja turtle. But I haven't ridden a motorcycle in 29 or 31 days, so that's adds to it. So yeah, it's exhausting. And if you're a photographer and don't shoot in bad weather, it means you haven't shot all month. And like every other skill, if you don't use it, you lose the skill. So we're going to talk about how to prepare and how to shoot and what to shoot in the rain in our starting point photography segment coming up later on in the show. For those folks who have noticed, and I'm sure you have, you folks who are watching the live version of the show, the video stream out of Google Hangouts and out of YouTube is a little blurrier than before. I just moved into a new house. As you can see, the studio has changed, and it will change again as I get everything set up the way I wanted to get set up. But the bandwidth in the new house is awful. It's awful. We're paying for the max bandwidth, and it's awful. Because the max bandwidth out here in the boonies of Chilliwack is only 5 megabytes download speed and less than 1 megabyte upload speed. Oh, that hurts. That hurts so much. So what that means is I wasn't sure if there's enough bandwidth to be able to push out a full HD resolution video stream and an audio stream. So I've downgraded the video stream in order to make sure there's enough room for the audio. I want the audio to be as clean and clear as possible. The video can be blurry because the video is just this face. You know, you don't care about this face. It's not important. So that's the reason why the video is a little lower quality than it usually is on the live version of the show. If you still want good quality video, every evening after the show, I upload the full resolution video to YouTube. So if you want to watch the full resolution YouTube video, check for it about an hour and a half, 2 hours after the show is over. Tomorrow morning is fine. And you'll be able to watch the full version of the video for the show. But just to be on the safe side, I've degraded the video. And on next week's show, if this works fine the way it is now, on next week's show I'll up the video bandwidth a notch and see if that works out fine. Then the week after, I'll up it a notch again to see if that makes any difference. Go back to HD to see if it makes a difference. It's okay right now. I'm surprised. I haven't seen anyone, as people start jumping on the stream. Not that you're accessing it from me. You're getting it from YouTube. I'm not seeing too many folks saying anything bad about the video stream right now. So fingers crossed. Hopefully, things will be okay. It was interesting because I was off traveling to the interior of British Columbia last week. I missed the Apple event live. We were driving to the interior to a little town called Kamloops, Kelowna. Going to Kelowna and Vernon to visit friends, Glenn and Susan, up there in Vernon. And, oh, by the way, saw a one-man play on Friday evening, and the play is called God is a Scottish Drag Queen. If you get a chance to see it, go see it. It is hilarious. Hilarious. Very, very funny. God is a Scottish drag queen. So I didn't get to watch the event video live. And the interesting thing is, I caught up to what was announced on Twitter later that evening and on Friday morning. I didn't actually watch the video until Monday. So that was an interesting way of seeing things, that I already knew it was going to be announced, and I knew people's opinions about what was being announced, but I hadn't watched the video itself. I don't think my opinions of the Apple event would have changed very much. It was very surprising how little Apple announced. It was very surprising and we'll talk about this with Jim Dalrymple in a few minutes, to see the direction that it feels like Apple is going in. It feels like Apple has just said, those traditional creative pros that we used to not develop for, or cater to, but who used to be big fans of ours, we don't care so much. We don't need them so much. We don't have to build machines that creatives love. Apple's going to build the machines they're going to build. If creators like them, great. If they don't, oh well. The problem is with the idea, some of the things that Apple is saying post-event, Phil Schiller was quoted today saying they removed the SD card from the MacBook Pro because the SD card stuck out. It was cumbersome. That's just stupid. I'm sorry, Phil. That's a stupid rationalization for it. You don't need to make dumb shit up in order to rationalize your decision. Just simply say it made it thinner. That's all you got to do. You know, they said, because most cameras have wireless now. Well, no, they don't. And B, the wireless is much slower than a dedicated SD card. Sorry, SD card slot. Then he said that people have card readers. Well, again, the card reader is going to be slower than a dedicated SD slot. And some folks have got micro SD and compact flash and that kind of stuff. Yeah, but the vast majority of photographers have got SD cards. So the rationalization felt a little weak tea. And they seem to have done that for a lot of other things too. Losing MagSafe, I think, is awful. I understand why they did it, but I love MagSafe. I can't tell you. You all know how clumsy I am. I can't tell you how many times MagSafe has saved my ass and not had me have a computer lying on the floor broken. So I'm not happy with the MagSafe. Moving on. The whole Thunderbolt, USB-C, all that kind of dongle stuff. I get the idea that pros don't want to carry dongles around because you lose them or you forget them or you got to have one in the office and one at home, one in the travel bag. That's less an issue for me. I think Apple did a pretty piss-poor job of explaining their decisions. We've heard since that the reason why the new MacBook Pro can only take 16 gigs of RAM is an issue with the chip from Intel that they're getting. That chip can't handle more than 16 gigs of RAM. Well, guess what, Apple? Tell us that. By not saying that, people just think Apple's stupid, that they're nickel and diming us for RAM. But they're not, because 16 gigs is the max RAM that thing can have. MacMan and Monty. Then use another chip. Thing is, Apple's focus is on speed and battery life. Using another chip wouldn't have gotten that speed, wouldn't have gotten that battery life. So for Apple, speed and battery life are more important than the amount of RAM you can get in a machine. But again, that's all Apple had to do was say that. If Apple had come out and said that, more people would be okay with the decision. They did not do a good job of explaining the rationale for some of these moves. And we'll talk to Jim Dalrymple about that. First up, though, later on the show, we'll talk about taking your camera out in the rain. Ooh, scary, kids. But up next, we're going to talk to our good friend Jim Dalrymple of The Loop at loopinsight.com. But all this and much, much more coming up. This is your Mac Life. Welcome back, folks. This is Your Mac Life. I am your host, Shawn King. Beside our phone is our good friend, Jim Dalrymple, The Loop at loopinsight.com. Jim, how you doing?
Well, that's a very interesting question. How you doing? Normally, I would just say good.
Okay. Why is it different this time?
So it's different because, let me tell you, you tell me how I'm doing after I tell you this.
Okay.
So my parents are here visiting.
Yay!
And my father is making me watch a Montreal Canadiens game.
Does your dad know Game 7 of the World Series is on?
Well, he doesn't care about that. He cares about the Montreal Canadiens.
I like your dad.
And he hopes for every team against the Bruins.
I love your dad.
My dad, a lot of people love my dad, but he's a very cruel, mean man. He's cold.
Wow. So who the Canadiens beating up on now?
Nobody. Actually, it's Montreal and Vancouver right now, and it's 0-0 in the second period. So that gives me a bit of, I feel good about that.
You feel good about watching the Canadiens?
No, I feel good about them not winning.
Oh,
they're not losing, but they're not winning.
That's right.
So,
That's
and
funny.
and you being a Canadiens fan, I thought you would appreciate that.
I absolutely would. I have so much more respect for your dad now.
Yeah, he's always been a Canadiens fan. So if this would be it.
Yeah, exactly. So last Thursday was the Apple event there in California. You were almost front and center. I saw you more in the video than I saw Angela Arendt, for Christ's sake.
Strange, isn't it?
It was very weird because she's a whole lot prettier than you are.
Well, I don't know about that.
Oh, I do. Trust me, I do. No. Okay, how about this? She's more stylish than you are.
Oh, I don't know about that either. I had my jeans and T-shirt on. I was rocking the shit out of that place.
She had some kind of coat on. Not sure where her coat was from. Maybe.
Yeah, could be Burberry.
Could be. Maybe, who knows?
Could be. Maybe it was Walmart.
You said on the loop in your comments, thoughts on Apple's Mac event. Events held on Apple's campus are my favorite. Why is that? Why would that be your favorite location?
It's my favorite because Apple is always very focused on campus.
Ah, okay.
And it's very small.
Yes.
It's not one of these big, events where they're entertaining everybody, and it's this, it's just very simple and a great event. I love those events. Those are my absolute favorite.
They do seem more focused and more direct and certainly more personable because it's a small room. It's like, 300 people maximum?
Yeah, I don't even know if it's that many.
Yeah, it's very small. The opening was interesting with the accessibility thing, although I'm a little confused how everyone seemed to think this was a bigger deal than what it felt like on stage. Does it feel like a big deal for you guys? Because to me, it felt like here's a little ad, and now we're going to move forward. They didn't seem to do much on stage with regards to accessibility.
Well, I think that the point was that they've already done a lot in accessibility. So they didn't do a lot on stage, but they've done a lot.
Yes.
And I met those people while I was waiting to go in. Yeah. And it's absolutely remarkable when you look at what Apple has done for accessibility and what it has allowed people to do. Stephen Aguino.
Yes.
He was there.
Yeah, cool.
I love Steve. I mean, he's come to the Beard Bash. He's, I've obviously been on Twitter with him for a lot.
Yep.
Very, very good writer. Very smart guy. He was there. I got a chance to say hi to him. It was great. But when you look at all of the things over the past decade that Apple has focused on with accessibility, to see a video like that was remarkable. It is remarkable what people are able to do because Apple does this.
And it's really, the thing I like about it is, as you said, Apple's been doing this kind of stuff for a very, very long time, and they've always tried very hard at it. They haven't always it hasn't. I don't think it's ever been shown off this way at an Apple event. But if you talk to those folks who have disabilities, even though Apple doesn't get it perfect, they are doing a lot more and seemingly trying a lot harder than any other company when it comes to making their technology, their applications, their OSs as accessible as they possibly can.
Yeah, agreed. Absolutely.
Yeah, it was good to see.
And I think, that's kind of what we should expect from Apple,
Yep.
and it's more than what other people have done.
Yep.
So, yeah.
The Apple TV announcements seemed like filler. I don't care until it actually happens. Until December rolls around, I don't care about the Apple TV announcements. You seem to feel the same way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It didn't matter.
Yeah.
You can say what you want about Apple TV. The fact is, it's the same as what it always was.
Yeah. That's right. It just has more apps I don't use.
Yeah. I've been waiting for single sign-on for how long? Since June.
Yep.
They told me it was coming in tvOS 10.
Yep.
Is it? Yeah, it's still not here. So I'm. This is the point where people say, why are you harsh on Apple? Well, I'm not harsh on Apple. I don't think unnecessarily. When Apple tells me that this is going to happen and it doesn't happen, then I'm harsh on them.
Yep.
So, when Apple tells me that Apple Music is going to work with your library and it doesn't, then I'm harsh. When Apple Music tells me that single sign-on is coming and it doesn't. Now, there's probably very good reasons for single sign-on not coming. One of those is that the people that make the apps or the channels like Comcast and DirecTV and Dish and all of these people haven't made the apps work. Yeah. I get that. But don't stand up on stage and tell me that this is coming. And then, we're 5 months later and it's still not there. And the OS that you said that it was coming in has been released and it's still not there. No, don't do that.
Doesn't that mean, though, that the same can be said for the EarPods, the AirPods that you are using as we speak? Apple said they would be available in October. They're not going to be available in October. And there are rumors, and they're only rumors, they might not be available till January of next year.
Yeah, well, I've had them since December, so screw you.
I got mine! Nice.
No, I agree with you. I mean, there's obviously something that happened, and I don't know what it is, but something happened. I wish I knew what it was.
Yeah, it's kind of frustrating that Apple does that, though, isn't it? That they won't explain things. This is something we'll talk about a little later on with regards to the MacBook Pros. But it's always been an issue with Apple is that either it's an issue internally or externally. It's someone else's fault or it's Apple's fault, but they don't say that. And the problem is nature abhors a vacuum. When they don't tell us, the media will make up things. And the media will make up things that are almost always going to be wrong and almost always make the company look worse than it actually is. When if they just would step up and go, hey, we don't have enough chips for it. Or, the W1 chip isn't working properly. Or do you am I right in that it's kind of frustrating that Apple doesn't tell us these things?
Well, sure. I mean, a bit frustrating, but we have no idea when this stuff is going to come.
Yep.
We really, we don't.
Yep.
It could come now. It could not. Who knows?
Speaking of things that will show up or won't show up, certainly, at what point during the Apple event announcement did you and the folks that are sitting around you start muttering to yourselves, there's not going to be a Mac Pro, there's not going to be an iMac? Was that something that you guys realized quickly, or it wasn't until like an hour later you're looking at your watch going, they're not going to announce any other new products?
Well, I actually didn't go in expecting a Mac Pro or an iMac, to be honest. Um, I expected a MacBook Pro.
But it certainly
But,
would. It was fair for us to guess there would be new iMacs and or new Mac Pros, right?
well, yeah, I wouldn't have been surprised
Yeah,
if there
yeah,
were new Mac Pros, but that's not what I expected.
yeah.
Going into the event, I expected MacBook Pros, and I got that. So, is 1,000 days too much for a Mac Pro? Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, come on. Um, but what is it that's holding up the Mac Pro?
Yep.
I don't know. I mean, is it the chips, or are the new chips less efficient and slower than the old chip? I
Yep.
don't know. I don't know. But
Oh,
there's got to be something, because they would at least update it with the new chips.
or 2 weeks ago tonight, you and I talked about this, and I said that this event was going to show us the direction and Apple's feelings towards the professional market, whether you define professional as that creative type or whether you define professional in some other way. Do you think this has done that? Do you think this is showing the professional market that Apple, you're no longer as important to the company as they used to be?
No, I really don't.
Really?
I've read a lot of the stuff that, I mean, look, here's part of the conclusion that I've come up with. And keep in mind that I've got one of the 13-inch MacBook Pros,
Yep.
so I've been using it. It's very fast. It's a very nice computer. But every single Pro market has different needs.
Yes.
So, and I don't think that's something that the average user realizes. So let's look at this I mean, we can look at this from two ways. Your way as a photographer, and you can tell me, and my way as a musician.
Yep.
So let's look at it from my way first, because my way is right and yours will ultimately be wrong. So, so hey, you call me. I don't call you.
That's right. Fair point. Fair point.
So let's and by the way, that I've been drinking Heineken for hours by the time you call me too.
Well,
so,
your father's there, so of course you have.
Yeah. So he actually doesn't drink,
But he drives you to drink.
Oh, there's a lot of things that drive me to drink. Jesus Christ. So looking at it from a musician's point of view, let's take a look at a couple of the things that have changed. So it's very powerful machine. There's no doubt about that. So any pro would be happy with that. They took away the card slot.
Yes.
I've had a card slot in a MacBook Pro for a decade.
Yep.
I haven't used it once.
Yep. And I use mine almost every day.
Not once. I have not used it a single time. So, do I care about the card slot? Me? No, I don't care. Take it out.
No.
I don't care. Now, they say today I saw an article, maybe it was Apple Insider, where they took the digital conversion out of the headphone jack.
Yep.
So now musicians won't be able to, plug in adapters and plug your guitar in. Okay, as a musician, do I plug in to the headphone jack? No. Do I know any musician that would call themselves a pro that would do that? No.
Yep.
What would we do? We would plug into one of the auxiliary ports. Is that a Thunderbolt or USB? Yes, absolutely. I would always have an external device, a mobile device, but an external device to plug into. So does the fact that they take the digital stuff out of the headphone jack matter? No, because I never used it.
Yeah.
Do I use the headphone jack? Yes, to listen to music. But if I'm actually working on a music project, I will use the headphone jack on the external device.
Yes.
So does that matter? Absolutely not. Matters not a bit. Does not matter. So, when I start to look at this, and I understand that your needs are different, and you are going to speak up in a minute and tell me those, although I'll probably mute and, fall asleep. I this stuff does not matter to me as a pro user. And I'm only thinking as a pro user, as a musician,
Yeah.
not as, something that I use it every day. Because I use a MacBook, a 12-inch MacBook, and it's fine for my daily use.
Yeah.
So, okay, now you go ahead.
Well, I think all your points are correct. I think one of the problems.
Okay, let's stop right there. Then.
I think one of the problems that we pros have is not understanding what you just said. If Apple takes out the things that you need, then Apple hates the pros. If they don't take out the things you need, then Apple loves the pros. John Gruber on Daring Fireball had a story about someone else's article. He said a less punchy but more accurate title for Bjornsson's piece would be "The downsides of depending upon a company with a relatively sparse product lineup when your personal needs are outside the mainstream." That's the issue. I think that is the key, is that we pros have to understand that nowadays our needs are outside of Apple's mainstream focus.
Well, yeah, okay, keep going.
And I think that's something that's not a bad thing. I think, Apple sells 5 million Macintoshes a quarter, which is great. But maybe 1 million of those might be considered to be pro machines. Would you agree with me on that?
Yeah.
So maybe Apple's looking at it this way. We're only making money off 1 million people. How much is it costing us to develop products for just 1 million people when we are selling tens and tens and tens of millions of products for the average everyday consumer? Hey, let's put our resources over there for the average everyday consumer. If the pros buy them, great, but we're no longer going to be making pro machines that are dedicated, that have all the bells and whistles for every pro known to man. I think that's the issue.
But see, you're being sneaky there and basically saying that Apple has given up on the pros, and I don't buy that. I don't think that they have.
Well, I think by not having a machine that has maximum performance and maximum memory is a good indication that you don't care about those at least higher end pros.
Well, okay, so let's look at this again from my perspective. Because, like I said a few minutes ago, yours doesn't really matter. So, I'm going to need another beer in a minute.
No kidding.
So, so if we look at this from my perspective, and you take the RAM, okay, so you have 16 gigs of RAM. I fully understand that there are a lot of pros, especially people that have been writing me and saying, I use Illustrator and I use, these big ass apps,
yep,
and I need more. And I get that. I do. And I feel terrible to a point because I don't use those. So, when I have run Pro Tools on a MacBook Air, an 11-inch MacBook Air with 4 gigs of RAM.
Yep.
I have run Pro Tools and recorded music. It was out of necessity, absolute necessity. Would that be my choice? Absolutely not. Yeah. We've discussed before. I'm not one of these people that are going to do a review based on I'm going to force myself to use this.
Yes.
This was out of necessity. I had to do it. And it worked. It worked great. It recorded. There were no pops and clicks and, hisses or anything else.
Yeah.
So obviously the power is there, and that's at 4 gigs. So now you're going to up that, by 4. So now what? Now it's going to work even better. So am I concerned as a musician in using the new MacBook Pro? No, I'm not.
But
I understand that you are. Maybe as a pro photographer.
Well, part of the issue here, though, is we've been conditioned to believe that more RAM is better, that 32 gigs is better than 16, 64 is better than. So even Apple has conditioned us to believe this. So when Apple says this new machine that you're going to spend $3,000 on only has and can only ever have 16 gigabytes of RAM without explaining the reasoning behind that. I think that's the issue. If Apple had said on stage, this thing is 16 gigs of RAM, we made this choice intentionally. We wanted to have a chip that was thinner, that had lots of power, that had great battery life, so we made this trade-off. If Apple had said that, there'd be less issue, but they didn't. So when they don't say it, we sit around and think to ourselves, well, Apple's screwing us out of 16 gigs of RAM or out of 32 gigs of RAM or out of the ability to put as much RAM as we feel we need to put in our machines. I think the problem is Apple hasn't done a very good job of explaining these kinds of things to pros.
No, I agree. I can't disagree with that.
Yeah, I think a lot of the things that have been written about the event last Thursday could have been solved with Apple being up front, and granted, not something they do very well, but even standing on stage in their marketing speak, if they had said something along those lines, it might have gone over a little better. Taking the SD slot out, okay, I get taking the SD slot out because you want the machine to be that much thinner. But Phil Schiller saying, oh, because it was cumbersome. Do you know what the word cumbersome means, Phil? That was just a stupid way of describing it.
Okay, so here's an interesting thing, and if you look back in my thoughts of the keynote, it's in there.
Yep.
That I said that Apple obviously still cares about size and weight because they talked about it a lot.
Oh God, yeah.
You know, they did talk about it a lot, and one thing that what I meant by that comment was, do the pros care about size and weight as much as Apple does?
Yep, some do, some don't.
Right. So if you have a 15-inch MacBook Pro, do you care about ports, or do you care about ports and size and weight, or do you care about versatility and RAM and everything else?
Yeah.
And honestly, I think you would get a different answer from whatever category of pros you were talking to.
Yeah, I mean, there are some pros who could get away with 16 gigs of RAM, and us old timers just saying those words just makes you laugh. You know, if all you're doing is a road warrior, you're in an airport, you're working on keynote slides, you're working in a Pages document, 16 gigs of RAM is fine. If you're a Final Cut Pro person, if you're a Photoshop person, 16 gigs of RAM might not be as big as one of your files.
Yeah,
you want
exactly.
maximum amounts of power. You want maximum amounts of RAM. And what Apple's told you is, And part of the issue is not Apple's fault when it comes to RAM. Photoshop is a notorious RAM pig.
Yeah,
it's from that point of view, it's coded very, very poorly. That it requires at least 16 gigs of RAM to itself, let alone for the operating system or anything else you want to do. So
yeah, try opening a raw image in that.
Exactly. You know, when I'm doing Lightroom work, I shut down every single application I've got because I want to have all my RAM dedicated to Lightroom because it's a pig too. So yeah, it depends on your needs, and I don't think Apple has done a very good job of explaining that sort of thing to people. And it's a real shame because I think, and for reading your review, Jim's got a first look at the 13-inch MacBook Pro up on loopinsight.com, not the touch barless one. None of the reviewers have got the touch bar ones, but it's a good machine. Taken in a vacuum, if that was the only thing that anybody had announced over the last month, you go, that's a good machine. It's expensive, but that's a good machine.
Good machine, yep.
Speaking of, let's move on now to that touch bar, which seemed to be the biggest single piece of news coming out of the event last Thursday. You haven't had a chance to play with it. You don't have a machine that has touch bar on it. But let's look at it from the point of view of sitting in the audience first and seeing the demonstrations. Did it wow you? Did it make you interested? Did you go, meh? Well, give us your thoughts.
Well, I did get a chance to play with it at the event.
Yes.
And it was actually more impressive than what I thought.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Were your first impressions more muted than the actual use?
Yes.
Yeah.
So when I saw it on stage, I thought, okay, that's cool. I'm thinking, when I think of MacBook Pro, I start to think about music. So I think, what could I do with this music wise? Okay, that could be a very cool thing.
Yep.
Will it, I've become so used to my process when using even a MacBook Pro for music. You hit the space bar to start and stop. I use the mouse to record. Can I just press on the touch bar to do stuff like this? Maybe that would be a lot better than trying to move the mouse around.
Yep.
So these are the types of things that I'm thinking of. But it actually, when the touch bar doesn't only do touch based on the app,
Mm-hmm.
it does touch based on the function. So there are a lot of possibilities for touch bar.
Yeah.
So, where is that going to go, and what am I going to be able to do with it? I don't know.
I thought it was really interesting the way, this has been a discussion among Mac users and certainly Windows users for years. Windows PCs, laptops have had the touch screen for quite some time. And every single person I've ever known who's actually used them as a normal person, not as a nerd, has said they hate it. They hate having to reach up to poke away at their screen. And that's what Apple said. That's what Apple's Craig Federighi said this to CNET afterwards, that they have prototyped this. They've had demos of it. They've done it for years, which I certainly believe. And he says, that action of reaching up, poke on your screen is not a good one. Okay, I get that. I accept it. I understand it. But how is the touch bar any different? It's a 4 millimeter difference from reaching up to touching the screen versus reaching up to touch the base of the screen. You see what I'm saying?
Well, yeah, I see what you're saying, but it's a different function. And I don't know ultimately how this will be used,
Yeah.
but Montreal just scored again, so my night just turned to absolute shit. My father's got his arms up, sitting over there. I think there's a big difference between having a play button on the touch bar and touching the screen itself.
Yep.
I don't think I want to touch the screen on a Mac.
Yep, I agree.
I really don't. Now, you give me an iPad, I immediately transition into touching the screen of an iPad. But it's a big difference. But if I can touch a button on a bar, maybe that would be different. I don't know, because I haven't sat down with one and actually tried to use it.
No.
It could very well be that what's going to happen is that I'll continue to work the exact same way that I have.
Yeah. See, because where I was going to go with that was that, okay, if reaching that far, all you're doing is you're less by an inch. If reaching that far is a bad thing, and the first thing I noticed, by the way, when I saw the new MacBook Pros was the gigantic trackpad, that just massive trackpad. I thought,
I know.
Well, why wouldn't the touch bar be right below the space bar? Or why wouldn't the touch bar be part of that giant trackpad? That seems to me to make more sense.
Yep.
So I don't understand why the touch bar is way up there. The old argument has been you want your hand on the keyboard and your left hand on the keyboard, your right hand on the mouse. Well, now if the keyboard has got this thing at the top of it, your hand has to come off the keyboard, reach up there, tap that thing, and then come back. Whereas if it were just on the trackpad or just below the space bar, that would make so much more sense to me. I'm trying to find somebody who can explain why I'm wrong on this. Because obviously Apple's smarter than me. Everyone's smarter than me. Why the hell am I the only one thinking this, that the touch bar would make more ergonomic sense, if nothing else, to be much closer to where your hands are, which is right next to the trackpad?
I need a beer.
Do you think that prognostications next year by this time, we will have a dedicated keyboard with the touch bar on it?
Wait a minute, what?
You'll have your own. You won't have to buy a MacBook Pro to get the touch bar. It'll be on its own keyboard that you'll buy from the Apple Store.
Well,
I think it's a no-brainer at $179.
Well, maybe you were right about the car, so Who am I to judge you?
You do it all the frickin' time.
Yeah, I know. I just said that as a joke,
Yeah,
just
no
because
kidding.
you're a Montreal fan. But
So,
actually, that's a very interesting topic. I don't know if they could actually do that, or
really, why wouldn't they be
no.
able to?
I don't know.
Because to
I
me,
don't know.
that's the first thing I thought of when I saw that was that they're going to sell a keyboard with a touch bar attached to it. You know, they're going to do just replace the function keys just like they do on the MacBook Pro now. They'll replace those function keys on your dedicated wireless or wired, whatever it might be, keyboard. So the folks who use the next version of an iMac will be able to get touch bar.
Interesting.
Did you see the Surface Studio, either presentation or the tease video they posted on YouTube?
I actually have not.
You got to watch that, dude.
I hate to admit it, but I have not.
You got to watch that for 3 reasons. One reason, the first 30 seconds of it looks exactly like an iPhone video demonstration. You know, where all the pieces are blown apart and they all come back together again?
Yeah.
They do the same colors, the same dark, the same silver. They just stole that. Just right up stole it. The second thing is the music is vaguely creepy. I'll let you listen to it to figure it for yourself. And the third thing is this is the first Microsoft product I have ever seen that I want to go in the store and try out. Not that I'm going to buy, but I want to go in the store and try this thing out. It is really, really interesting and cool looking.
So you're not the first person that I've heard say that,
Yeah.
which is very interesting. Maybe Microsoft has turned a corner here.
You know what? Part of it is with Apple not doing this kind of stuff for pros for the last 3 years, maybe it gave Apple or Microsoft the idea of, hey, if they're not going to do it, if they're not going to cater to the pros, let's us do it. Now, granted, It's a very specific computer. It's for artists. It's for Photoshop users. It's for graphic designers. It's for people who draw for a living.
You could argue that's exactly what Apple didn't deliver.
Exactly.
You know,
it is a really interesting product. At $3,000, I can see a lot of people, maybe not as many iMac users, switching to this gigantic, seemingly pretty goddamn gorgeous machine with the Microsoft version of an Apple Pencil. I've talked to a few artists and I've talked to a few people who use iMacs and who use iPad Pros. You know, this is kind of like a triple size iPad Pro that runs on your desktop. Now, the problem is I've talked to artists. One of the things artists want to do is they want to tilt their machine on an angle to the left or to the right. That's how you draw on a piece of paper. We don't draw on a piece of paper that's sitting directly in front of us. We slide it off on an angle. You can't do that with this machine. So there are some downsides to it. But it does look really cool. You got to go to YouTube and watch the video. It's really, really interesting. But I think that part of it is exactly that. This is Microsoft saying, hey, if Apple's not going to cater to these people, there's money there to be made. Let's us go and grab some of those books.
And do you think they will?
Will Microsoft? Yes. I think the Surface Studio will be, depending on how you define it, will be a success, if only because those kinds of pros gravitate to whatever the best machine is. They're not platform. They're platform agnostic. Because one of the things is, when you're a professional, you're in one app, 2 apps solely for your entire day. So if you're a Photoshop user, you're using Photoshop 75% of the day. So you're not actually using Windows very much. So a Mac user can get away with this kind of device using Photoshop because Photoshop, that's all they're going to be doing is Photoshop work. If you're an InDesign user, if you're an illustrator, that's all you're going to do is do that on this Surface Studio. So
let me ask you this. I'm going to turn to the interviewer here.
All right.
You're a professional photographer.
Yes.
If you had to buy a machine right now, what would it be?
For everything that I do, I would buy if I'm talking about doing work professionally, like making money at it, I'd still buy an iMac. because
No. You had to buy a portable machine.
portable
money,
machine.
Yeah, money's no object.
Yeah, I'd still go with the high-end 15-inch MacBook Pro.
Okay,
But that's only because of the operating system. And I completely recognize that Windows has gotten light years better than it was in the past. It's still not the Mac OS. It's still not the OS I'm comfortable with. And I know I can do the exact same things on a MacBook Pro that I can do on a PC. I just like the overall Apple ecosystem. I like the operating system. I like the way things work. I like Apple Pay, even though I have no money. I like the way all that. One day.
Yeah, I know. That's the funny thing about Apple Pay. You actually have to have money in order to use it.
Apple didn't give me any money to use Apple Pay, so I ain't got no damn money.
Do you use Apple Pay? You want to give me some cash?
Exactly.
I'll use it as much as you want.
I'll give it a shot. I've seen it. I've seen the button on websites, but I have never pushed it because there's no point.
Yeah,
there's no point in me hitting that button. But I think
I can only handle so much rejection. I don't need it from a website.
That's right. That's right. But I do believe that the 15-inch MacBook Pro with the Touch Bar is the best laptop most people can buy. That's the most bang for your buck. I think that's going to be it. If you have specialized needs or specialized wants, then maybe it's a different machine for you. It might be a compact or a Dell or something like that. But overall, for the vast majority of folks, I think that MacBook Pro is going to be the absolute killer machine for a lot of people.
Okay, I'm going into the interviewer thing here again. Schiller said that online orders for the MacBook Pro are better than what they've ever been. For the new one, how do you justify that with all of the criticism? I'm good at this. I'm good at this interviewing.
You are. I've always said you are. You should do your own podcast. I think this is two things. First of all, Apple's never
You're
said
such an asshole.
I know. I'm a professional. Damn it.
How do you reconcile that?
Two things. First of all, Apple has never said that before about their laptops, have they? That's the first time Apple's made that statement, that they've got more pre-orders than anything else. So that's Apple saying to all the naysayers, you're wrong. I think it also shows that the market for these things is much bigger than just the naysayers, just the techno pundits online who are complaining about this stuff and who are most of them are so far up their own assholes. I mean, one guy actually complained. He said, I wish Apple was still licensing the operating system. Are you out of your fucking mind? A, that was 20 years ago. And B, if they were, the company would be dead by now. And even the well-respected Chuck von Rospack posted a great article, but he posted on Twitter the old Apple four-box matrix and said Apple should go back to this. Well, if Apple was still that company, they wouldn't be who they are today. These people have to understand that Apple's got to move forward. Even if you don't move forward, Apple's got to move forward.
Here's the thing. He brought up a good point, and it's a point that I think will stick with me forever, that people want Apple to change, but they don't want things to change.
It's a great line.
I'm paraphrasing that, but it's something like that. And he is exactly right.
Yep.
Exactly right. That's people were talking about the price. People were talking about, the fact that there were no great changes. My mother bought a computer, a MacBook Pro, in 2012, and she looked at the new ones. She's here too with my father watching the Montreal Canadiens, which, I hate to even admit that they're doing that.
They didn't raise you right.
I know. Yeah, I was raised by gorillas.
Well, you don't like lobster and you don't like the Canadians. I mean, you like Boston. There's something desperately wrong with you.
So she looked at the price of the new MacBook Pros and said, that doesn't seem that bad. It seems good to me. Yeah. She wasn't upset about the price. She looked at the toolbar. Yep. That looks interesting. She is not a pro user, but she would buy a MacBook Pro.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
I do believe Apple's got it right, though. I do believe Apple believes that for the average person, for your mom and other folks like that, the iPad is a perfectly good computer for them. You know, if they can get their mind around the paradigm of the iPad, of the way the iPad makes you work, the iPad can be the computer for a very large portion of Apple's customer base. And then the MacBook Pro is for those other folks. It's gotten light enough now they can kill the air. I understand why they killed the air. I have no problem with them killing the air. We know that in a year's time, the price of that 13-inch touch bar-less one will come down in price too. My only real concern is Apple no longer has a machine under $1,000. Apple doesn't care about that, though. I understand that. So for folks on a budget, Apple doesn't have a machine for them. But for folks on a budget, Apple's never really had a machine for them.
Well, yeah, Apple's never going to have a $500 computer.
Yep.
And I think that people need to understand that. And I think most people do, you know?
Yep.
But when you look at a MacBook Pro and you hear all the pundits saying, you know, it's too expensive and it doesn't have enough. And then I talked to my mother, who has a Mac, has an iPad, has an iPhone, and looks at it and says, this looks like a great computer. I mean, are those the people that are doing these early orders? And does Apple care? They're getting the orders.
Yep, that's right. As long as Apple's getting the money, they're okay with that. By the way, I just want to make clear to folks, as Dave D points out in the RC chat room, the MacBook Air isn't officially dead. It's still on Apple's website, but it's on life support, and they'll pull the plug after Christmas.
Do you think?
Yeah. You know, they'll sell what they can over this holiday season. People will go into the stores and say the MacBook Pro was too expensive. Hey, let's buy this Air thing instead. But the MacBook Air is not long for this.
So what replaces the Air? Ask Steve D. What replaces the Air?
The 13-inch MacBook Pro without the Touch Bar.
Oh no, I don't.
You don't think so?
About that.
Okay.
No, I don't know. But ask him. What does he say?
All right, folks in the RC chat room, will Apple kill the Air? And if so, what would they replace it with?
Yeah.
Mosquito says, what replaces the Air at the cheap end? What will replaces the Air at the cheap end will be the 13-inch MacBook Pro.
No.
Okay.
No.
All right.
No. There has to be something else. And for me, it's the MacBook.
Yeah.
You know, the MacBook, I think, is a beautiful computer. And what I know the people have talked about this keyboard forever, the MacBook keyboard. I love the MacBook keyboard.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. I love it. The one on the MacBook Pro is even better. It is better. It has a bit more travel. I mean, it could be a millimeter more travel when you touch it, but it feels so much better.
And keyboards are so personal. I mean, that's probably the keyboards in mice because you're touching it all the time. So yeah, I can understand why people like or don't like a version of a keyboard. I don't think it makes a difference over time. I think you get used to it over time. But I know I completely understand why you love it. I think Jason Snell didn't like it, and it's the same keyboard.
He didn't like it.
Yeah,
but that's the thing, though. I'm right. He's wrong. Yeah. I don't know why you're laughing right now. But
someone said something funny in the IRC chat room.
Because I'm not laughing. I mean, I am right. This keyboard is magnificent.
I think Arksign's being sarcastic. He says, remember, Dave, Shawn was right about his no car call when everyone thought it was a sure thing. I think he's being sarcastic, a rat bastard.
He's a rat bastard.
No, I'm throwing it out there. I'm not saying I'm guaranteeing it. I think that the way Apple is going, I think they're paring down that line, and they will start removing things out after this Christmas. I think not having an iMac announcement before this Christmas, not having a Mac Pro announcement, not as important, but before this Christmas, you know, there are rumors there'll be a Mac Pro announced next January or February. I think that'd be stupid of Apple to do that. But I think by not doing these updates, Apple is saying we're paring down the line to be the bare minimum of products that we can sell.
Okay. So now you're getting back to the Matrix thing that you talked about. The Matrix, that was an important thing at the time.
Oh, absolutely, it was.
Absolutely. So is the Matrix as important right now?
It's a different.
Could Apple pare down the line and get rid of the MacBook Air in favor of the MacBook, which I happen to love and I used every day until I started using this MacBook Pro. And keep in mind that while using the MacBook, the 12-inch MacBook, I had a 15-inch MacBook Pro with a card reader that I've never used. So now the MacBook Pro comes with the keyboard that I love so much, and like I don't know how many times the power more that it has. So would the MacBook replace the MacBook Air and the MacBook Pro become, and that would, that would cut down the line.
Yep. Because
that matrix would become smaller.
I think the Mac Mini is also going to be dead soon. I think it's on life support. And I'd argue the Mac Pro is as well. I think Apple is going to segue the Mac Pro into a very high-end iMac. It'll become that the iMac will become the Mac Pro, if you know what I mean.
Now, okay, so I have a 27-inch iMac.
Me too.
And I absolutely love that machine.
Yep, me too.
I mean, it's just like horsepower of anything that you need to do. And you know what's funny? I don't even know how much RAM is in that machine.
I was checking to see the same thing.
I have Pro Tools, Logic, all kinds of music software applications on there. I have all of my music hardware applications, Universal Audio stuff, all attached to that. I don't even know how much RAM, and it's inside. And in order to get to it, I would go check, but in order to get to it, I would have to pass the beer fridge, and I know I would stop on the way.
Exactly. Yeah.
So so I'm not going to bother. So. But the thing is, I've never run out of power on that machine to record. So the 27-inch iMac to me is just like this blissful thing. But if I think back, 5, 10 years, in order to do the things that I'm doing on this iMac, I would need a Mac Pro, which I had.
Yep.
I had a Mac Pro to do all of this stuff. And it had PCI slots, and it had all of this stuff going on. But I don't need that anymore. So that my point is that where we're going with the MacBook Pro.
Yeah, that's right.
That you just don't need all of these, USB ports, and you don't need any of this stuff anymore like you used to do.
And again, this is a perfect example that we use these things differently. I've got all my USB ports in the back of this iMac full. I've got one out of my two Thunderbolt, HDMI, whatever goddamn thing ports back there. My Ethernet port is plugged in. I've got there's no audio port in this thing, and I've had on several occasions I will get a message that says you have no more RAM available to be used in this machine, which is weird considering supposedly virtual memory is supposed to kick in. But I had an issue where the machine has said you're using up too much RAM. So depending on how you use it, did you just burp in my goddamn ear? Did you just belch in my ear? Just say yes or no.
Me.
God damn it!
Yes.
You know what the problem? The problem with the earpods is you couldn't take one out because the other one would have kicked in.
God, that's just off. You know what the worst thing about that is?
What?
It's like the fourth time I've done it, and that's the first time you've noticed. Okay. Let's get back to it. I don't know where Apple's going with the Pro market, but if we look back, let's look back to the late 90s with all of the stuff that Apple started cutting out of their machines, and we can go back to floppy disks and adding USB and CD-ROMs and cutting that out, and having a dongle, basically a dongle super drive. You remember those?
Oh yeah.
And people were upset at first, but then they realized, how many apps have I installed using a CD?
Yeah.
Well, none.
Yep.
You know, so I don't know what that same thing is like for pros. I know for musicians, for me, it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I, you know, you're going to have a different opinion of this.
Yep.
Somebody that uses Illustrator is going to have a different opinion of this. But for a musician, the stuff that Apple took away is not a big deal.
I think one
It's
of the
just
I
not.
think one of the things that's been fascinating about watching this over the last 5 days is it really feels like that old Aesop's fable about the five blind men grabbing the elevator, grabbing the elephant.
I don't.
It depends on where you're grabbing it. Very few of these guys are taking a look at the big picture, the overall market, the overall picture, things from Apple's point of view. Everyone seems to have this very narrow, it's only my opinion that matters. It's only my way of using the computer that matters. No one else is doing it right. And that's what you have to really worry about or watch out for, folks, when you read these stories is find
Right.
out what the bias of that guy is or that girl is who's writing these stories, because that informs their opinion of it. Look for more generalists, guys like Jim
Right.
who use them just the way a normal person does, as opposed to someone who only does one thing and therefore this is a bad machine or this is a good machine because I only do this one thing on it and therefore it's good or bad because of that.
Well, and you know, when I do ultimately, when you know, whenever this is, and I do a review of the Touch Bar one,
Yeah.
I will, and I said my first look that I'll try and record music and you know do all this stuff to see what the power is like, because as a musician, I want to be able to get on a plane and have you know 100 or 200 tracks of music. You know, I want to be able to edit this music. I want to be able to. Does the MacBook Pro have that type of power
Yeah.
to allow me to do that? If it doesn't, then I'm in some trouble because that's what I need.
Yep.
I need you know a multi-gigabyte project. Like you know like 40 gigabyte project. Can I edit this and play it back so that it sounds good? So that when I you know if I was going from San Francisco to New York, can I land, have this project edited and mixed and you know pass it off to somebody? You know, ultimately that's what it's about
Yeah.
for a pro, and for you, for a photographer, you want to be able to uh, uh, you know have your photos edited, and you want to be able to upload your photos.
Yep.
And you want to be able to do all this kind of stuff. You know, can that be done on a 5 hour flight on a MacBook Pro?
Yeah, everyone's going to have different wants and needs, and I think Apple is in a unique but also difficult position, and they have historically tried to encompass everybody. I don't think they're doing that anymore. I think they're saying, okay, we're going to go down this middle road, and there's some room on the left and some room on the right, and we'll try to fit those folks in, but we're not going to the shoulders on either side anymore. There's no longer going to be a professional Mac with 5 SCSI slots in it where you can put all this stuff into it.
Oh my God, SCSI.
Oh God, yeah,
Wow.
no kidding. So I think that's where Apple is going, and they're just saying, you know, we're going to do the best we can, and hopefully a lot of you like it, but we're no longer going to apologize for not being able to grab every single dime from every single person out there, and we're going to leave some crumbs for Microsoft. I think Microsoft will get some of those crumbs. So I think that studio looks really, really cool, and we'll get some interest from creatives.
Huh.
Folks, I've been talking to you for quite a while. Thanks for. I think he was on the phone so long to avoid his dad, but I appreciate it anyway. Jim Dalrymple from the Loop at loopinsight.com. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks a lot, Shawn.
All right, bye, buddy. Folks may not understand the whole animosity that Boston and Canadians the Montreal Canadiens fans and Boston Bruins hockey fans have, and Jim. It's weird that Jim's a Bruins fan because when Jim and I were kids living in Halifax, there was a farm team for the Montreal Canadiens called the Voyageurs, and they were the AHL team, so it was like AAA in baseball, the AAA team for the Canadians. So when Jim and I were kids, we'd go to the Halifax Forum. We'd watch these guys that we'd see, like every other farm team, like 2 or 3 years later in Montreal, playing for the big club, as it were. And one of the great things about these small town or farm teams is that you have a lot more of an opportunity to meet the players. They do a lot more things out in the community. I remember we saw some of the hockey players all the time at charity events and at car washes and all kinds of things like that. And so when they moved up to the big club, you were like, hey, I know that guy. I saw that guy at Tim Hortons kind of thing. And so as a kid, you build that affinity for that club. But Jim, the whack job he is, never built that affinity for the Canadians. And so worse, so he doesn't like the Canadians. That's fine. But then as a fan, he became a fan of the most hated team of the Canadians, which is the Boston Bruins. Boston and Montreal have historically hated each other, like with more so than Montreal and Toronto. That's a national thing. It's a Canadian thing versus a hockey thing. But it's Montreal and Boston. So Jim chose the Boston Bruins, and he'll go to hell for that. Trust me, he will. Folks, if you have any comments about anything Jim and I talked about, we had a great long conversation. I want to thank Jim very much for being on the phone with me for so long. Great conversation with him. If you have any comments, email me on air at yourmaclifeshow.com. I'd love to hear what you guys think. Do you agree or disagree with what we said? Michael Sy, a great developer. He does one of my favorite apps, SpamSieve, but I think he's dead wrong. He says, new MacBook Pros and the state of the Mac. I was really disappointed with today's Apple event. How can you be disappointed? He says, it seems like Apple has either lost its way, lost touch with what some of its customers want, or doesn't care about those customers. Apple no longer considers them to be core, that being creative professionals. He said, there's nothing particularly wrong with what Apple announced. I like Thunderbolt 3. The display looks good. I'm not crazy about Touch Bar, but it seems potentially useful. He says, the problem is that the MacBook Pro is not a true Pro notebook. Well, that's what Jim and I were talking about. It depends on how you define Pro and how Apple defines Pro. Pro is different for different people. And so what he's saying is Apple isn't building a MacBook Pro for him, for his wants and his needs. Okay, I get that. But Apple is not a company for Michael Sy. It's a company for the vast majority of consumers that are out there. That's Apple's job, is to build computers for those millions and millions of people. If it means they lose the Michael Sys of the world but sell 2 million more to other people, Apple's going to be happy with that trade-off. Apple has no problem with that trade-off. I think it's part of the problem with this, the way the tech pundits on the interwebs look at this stuff. They look at it from the very narrow prism of what they want and what they need. And anything outside of that is bad. And that's the problem I have, is I get looking at things through your narrow prism, but then deciding that the thing is outside of your view, then it's a bad thing, as opposed to, oh, just not something I want or need. I would argue that the Surface Studio is not a computer I'd ever buy, that I'd ever need. I'm not saying it's bad. I've never used it. I don't know. I think it's probably a good computer for the people who want and need that, but it's not for me. But I'm not saying it's bad for everybody. But that's what a lot of these pundits say, is if it's not good for me, it's not good for anybody. Well, you have an awfully narrow viewpoint and it's a lack of understanding of who and what Apple is. Apple's not that company anymore, kids. That's not who they are. You got to get out of that 20 years ago thinking. Like I've always said, Apple's not your best friend. Apple's not the cool uncle. Apple is a major multi-billion-dollar multinational company. And they have a job to make as much money as they can. If they happen to be doing things that I like, great. But they don't got to do things I like, as long as they're making money. Mosquito says Chuck's assessment was more sensible and more aware of the world outside. Exactly. Chuck admitted his biases and pointed out our biases. Like Jim said, his mom thinks the MacBook Pro is a good machine. Not expensive. I think his mom's wrong. I think it's expensive, but again, I'm too poor for Apple Pay, so what the hell do I know? I will admit that I'm sad to see MagSafe go. I love MagSafe. MagSafe, I have no doubt that MagSafe saved my computer at least 5 times. It saved my laptop at least 5 times. It saved it today when I got up out of here and kicked the power cable. So I'm sad to see MagSafe go. There's a bunch of other stuff that the illuminated Apple logo, I don't care. I don't care if the Apple logo illuminates or not. That just seems silly to me. I'm more complaining about function keys. The SD slot, yeah, that's an annoyance. I understand why Apple did, but again, I think Phil Schiller, his explanation of getting rid of the SD slot was just ridiculous. Saying it was too cumbersome. You mean a dongle is less cumbersome, Mr. Schiller? That's just stupid. Just say it. We took it out to save space. It's not that hard. Don't make shit up. The SD slot is not cumbersome. Yes, the SD card sticks out, but so does a fucking dongle. So does a card reader. It's a dumb excuse. Say, we made the machine thinner, we made the machine lighter because we took out this SD slot. Okay. Fine. Like Jim said, Jim's never used it, and I use it almost every day. So, different viewpoints. But Apple's explanation of it was just really silly. I'm just looking at the time and trying to decide whether or not I want to. I know the rain's going to continue, so we can go with the rain segment on next week's show, because it's not like it's going to stop raining on me. By the way, have any of you guys heard of this app called Walter? Walter 2? The nice folks at Softorino sent me a copy of it. I was a beta tester of the original version of of Walter. You know what I'm going to do? Now that I think about it, don't buy Walter 2. I know Josh is going to get pissed at me. What the hell wrong with that cut and paste? Don't buy Walter 2. I'm going to get Josh to give us some copies to give away. Walter's is a really neat app. One of the frustrations I have with the Macintosh, always have, with the OS, is I can watch some videos on my Mac that I can't watch on my Apple TV, that I can't watch on my iPhone. And I know why, but it still pisses me off. There are files I'll download from the internet, and I'll be the first one to admit it. Sorry to my ISP. I download MotoGP races every weekend and World Superbike races every weekend because they don't show up on TV here. I'm not stealing them if I can't get them. So I BitTorrent those files. And those files often come in as MKV files, which won't play natively on the Macintosh. So I open them up in VLC. They won't play in iTunes, so I got to convert them using Handbrake. Well, now, with Walter 2, it opens up on your desktop. I think I can... Walter 2, there we go. I can show you guys how this works. So there's Walter, and it says iPhone 6 Plus, 65.8 gigabytes free, drop files here or select files. So all I got to do is find one of my MotoGP races. I go to my folder, and there's Moto 2 Japan, woohoo, MKV. And all I do is just drag and drop it. When you see what it does there, it just gets all... I let it go. analyzes files, retrieving artwork and metadata, and then it will work in the background. Usually it's faster than that. I wonder why it's so slow this time. Well, anyway, I'll just let it go in the background. Oh, that's why there's the new version that wants me to update. Okay, hang on. Extracting update, installing relaunch, installing update, relaunching, connecting. Okay, maybe now it'll be faster. Drag drop the same file. Analyzing file, retrieving data. Anyway, what happens is it ends up putting those files not only on the iPhone, but in the right place on the iPhone too. It'll do it for iBooks. It'll do it for ringtones. It'll do it for whatever else. It converts them and then puts them in the right place on the. It's a great app. I love it. I love this thing. I love Walter 1, and I think Walter 2 is a real help. Dave D, who's got time to watch video? I need more real time. I use these videos. I watch them on my big screen TV, for example. So I'll put them on the iPhone, and then I will AirPlay them to the big screen TV. Or I'll watch them when I'm at a friend's house, when I'm traveling, when I'm waiting in line, all the time. All kinds of videos. There's all kinds of Photoshop and Lightroom tutorial videos that I'll watch when I'm traveling or on the bus. Just quick, here's how to do this thing kind of stuff that just don't work natively on the iPad or the iPhone. Monty, why do you want us to buy this app? Because I'm going to get them to give us a couple of review copies, and I'll give them away on next week's show. How's that? Or you can buy, if you want to buy it yourself, go right ahead, Monty. I'm just trying to save you a few bucks. But I really like the guys at Softorino. They make a lot of really cool apps, and big fan of Josh and the gang at Softorino. So wait till next week, and if you don't win next week, then you can buy it next week. How much is it anyway? Buy Walter 2, $40. That's not cheap, but $60 gets you a lifetime license for 2, which is not bad. No, it's not cheap, but if you watch a lot of videos, if you convert a lot of videos, that's the thing. If you are one of those folks who uses Handbrake and converts a lot of the videos that you download or YouTube, things like that, then this will save you a lot of time. If you're not, if all you ever do is watch iTunes compatible videos, then no, this wouldn't save you any time. But for me, because I grab videos from all kinds of different sources, this does save me a lot of time, and I do like it. So Softorino.com, SOFTORINO.com. And again, they're really nice people. I really like Josh and the gang over there at Walter at Softorino. So check them out if you get a chance. I'll do the starting point photography segment on rain shooting next week because I know it's going to still be frickin' raining here. It's going to rain till April here in Vancouver. Scott Thrift, does Walter 2 support scripting for an auto conversion workflow? Holy shit, dude. I have no freaking clue. It's a good question, though. Check out the support page, Softorino. But scripting would be a good thing, or at least being able to drag and drop multiple files onto the app and let it do it in the background. I think it would be really cool. So if it's not available, let me know, Scott. If you find out one way or the other, let me know. So I'll tell the audience on next week's show. Folks, that's it for tonight's show. I want to say thanks very much, as always, to our good friend Jim Dalrymple of The Loop at loopinsight.com for joining me here for a little longer extended version of Jim's segment. And again, to you guys, send me your thoughts and opinions about the new MacBook Pros. Will you be buying them? Were you disappointed there was no iMac, no Mac Pro, no Mac Mini? Are those machines dying? Will you be buying any kind of new Macintosh this Christmas? Or will you stick to not buying or an iPhone or an iPad? Let us know what your Christmas plans are as we head into the holiday season. And as always, I thank you guys very much for being tuned in, whether you're listening to the show live or via the archive. I love having you guys being tuned into the show. Looks like the video hung around, folks. Looks like the shitty bandwidth here at TELUS actually held up. So fantastic. If you have any audio problems with the show, let me know. Audio, video problems with the show, let me know so I can try to fix them. And on next week's show, we'll have an even better setup here in the studio. We got the wall, I got the wall of cameras here. You can see all the cameras I've got, and then I've got over there, I've got a whole bunch of penguins too. So we'll get all that stuff set up. Get all that stuff set up for next week's show as well. Jeez, I messed everything up, didn't I? So until next week, folks, thanks very much for the show. Sherry says, looks like you can click it up a notch for next week. Yeah, I will, Sherry. I'll nudge it up one more notch for next week's show. As always, till next week, I've been Shawn King, and you've been listening to Your Mac Life. Thanks very much for joining me. See ya!